So my question is, are resistance bands and light dumbbells effective implements for true strengthening to take place? There's a growing realization in the yoga world that strength is important for yoga practitioners. And there's also a growing realization that a typical body weight yoga practice doesn't really involve much opportunity for actual strengthening to take place. So that's why many yoga teachers these days have been bringing in some new and innovative props into their yoga classes with the intention of adding external loading options so that their students can strengthen their bodies. Now, some of the most common implements that I've noticed that have been brought into yoga classes lately are resistance bands and dumbbells, specifically light dumbbells, kind of on the lighter end of the spectrum. So my question is, are resistance bands and light dumbbells effective implements for true strengthening to take place? So, as with so many things, there isn't really a total black or white answer, but we can gain some insight into this if we take a look at strength and what strength really means. Like, what are we talking about when we're talking about strength? So strength, like the ultimate definition of strength is it's a measure of how much force a muscle can produce. And in the truest sense of the term, strength really means how heavy of a weight you could lift one time. So if I had like a really heavy weight here underneath me and I was able to lift it off the floor, but then I wasn't able to lift it off the floor a second time, I could only do it one time. That would be a representation of how strong I am, at least in this movement pattern of picking something up off the floor. So in the context of strength training, it's not really limited to just like you lift the amount of weight that you could only lift one time, but really it's treated as more of a range. So it's a rep range, because repetitions in strength training, you lift things, more than once repeatedly. So if you're lifting a weight that's so heavy that you could lift it between 1 and about 6 times, that is traditionally called the strength rep range in the strength training world. And then beyond that, if you're lifting a weight that you could lift between about 7 to about 12 times, so we might think of that as like a medium heavyweight compared to the heavyweight, which is that 1 to 6 rep range. So if you're lifting a medium weight, 7 to 12-ish rep range, that is something called the hypertrophy range. Hypertrophy is just a fancy exercise science term that means muscle growth. And hypertrophy and strength, they are distinct concepts, but they're also related. And for our purposes, we can consider any weight that we're able to lift between 1 and about 12 times. We could consider all of that to be strengthening. So if we're working with weight or load that's heavy enough that we could only lift it 1 to 12-ish times, that would be enough load to truly offer us some strengthening benefits. Now, if we go above and beyond that range, we start to get into something called the muscle endurance rep range. So any weight that starts to get more on the lighter edge of things to where we could lift it about 13 times and greater, so up to 20, 30, 40 times, those would be considered light weights. And when we lift weights like that, it's still beneficial. But what the benefit that we're getting is something called muscle endurance, which has more to do with sub-maximal muscle contractions and sustaining them more over time. Improving our muscle endurance with light weights, it may have some positive effects on our actual strength, but really, truly, strength is specific, and muscle endurance is at the other end of the spectrum from strength. So they're not really the same thing. Now, when we're talking about things like resistance bands or light dumbbells, these are, hopefully we can kind of see and picture that the resistance offered by these implements is probably more on that lighter side. So for example, if I were to, this is a 3-pound dumbbell, which is a pretty typical dumbbell weight that I tend to see when weights are brought into yoga classes. If I were to do something like this here, which is called a row, like I could probably lift this 3-pound dumbbell, I don't even know how many times, but many, many times before I actually can't lift it anymore. So that would definitely be something that would be more on the muscle endurance side, as opposed to this much heavier weight. That's a lot more weight for me to lift, and I could actually lift it far fewer times. So a weight like this for my body would be considered heavy, and that would be the type of load that would actually offer me more strengthening benefits on the strengthening side of the spectrum. So hopefully we can start to see that amount of load matters when we're talking about strengthening. And ideally for true strengthening, we want to be working with medium to heavy weights. And light weights are good, but they're more on the muscle endurance side, and that's something different. There's one more factor that also comes into play when we're talking about strengthening, and that is that we need to be lifting whatever load we're lifting to the point of failure or to almost failure. And all that means is just that you're lifting your object to the point where you can't lift it anymore, or you're getting to the point where maybe you could lift it 1 to 2 more times, but that's it. So that's called like getting close to failure or going to failure. So in order for whatever load you're working with to have a stimulus to create an adaptation in the body, we need to be lifting it to the point of failure. Now, I find in my experience with the yoga class example and things like resistance bands and light dumbbells, I find that these tools are not usually used to the point of failure, because that would kind of involve like pulling on them many, many, many times, and that just doesn't really fit in very well in a yoga flow context. So not only in yoga settings where we're using resistance bands and light dumbbells, not only are we not going to failure with these tools, but if we were going to failure, the adaptation that would be taking place would be more on that muscle endurance side and less on the maximum strength side. So just to be clear, that is not to say that light dumbbells and resistance bands are like not worth using in yoga. Not at all. I think that they're still great tools. And I'll just throw in as a caveat that I do think these tools can be strengthening in certain instances. It's just not across the board. But one example, which I actually think could be strengthening, would be, for example, you're holding your light dumbbells. Maybe you hinge forward, lift the dumbbells up as high as you can behind you, and then take them all the way forward, really trying to keep them high. Here we have this long lever position where my arm is long and the weight is at the end of my arm, and I'm loading the upper body. So I tend to find that long lever positions, especially for the upper body, these actually have a potential to be strengthening stimulus even with light loads. So this is not to say that, again, light dumbbells and resistance bands have no strengthening benefits to offer, but it's kind of few and far between, and it certainly does not cover all of our foundational movement patterns. So with that said, to me, it just comes down to what our goals are. If our goal is to truly strengthen our body or our students' bodies, then light dumbbells and resistance bands are probably not going to get us there. They're more on the muscle endurance side for the most part, and we're not really taking that work to failure. So we're not really meeting either of the two things we need for true strength. For true strength, we want medium to heavy weights, and we want to go to failure. If you're interested in learning about effective strength training that will support and enhance your yoga practice, find us at strengthforyoga.com, and that link is also listed in the description for this video. See you there.